Hello everyone, thanks so much for joining me today. Hope everything is good from wherever you are. And let's dive in. So today's daf is Bava Kamma Daf 74 Amud B. So continuing from the last daf, Rabbi Zeva objects to the basic objection of the Brisa that when a master inflicts two injuries upon his Canaanite slave, he must indemnify the slave for the second injury. One can say instead that if the master blinded his slave's eye, the slave should go free on account of his eye, and if he knocked out his tooth, he should go free on account of his tooth. And if the master both blinded his eye and knocked out his tooth, the slave should go free on account of both his eye and his tooth, without the master having to pay damages for the loss of his tooth. Abai said to him in response, with regard to your claim, the verse states, "Come to know that a Canaanite slave does not become emancipated as soon as his master inflicts an injury on one of his extremities. Rather, it is only upon the pronouncement of the court's judgment that the slave is emancipated. In light of this halacha, it's difficult to understand why the master is obligated to compensate the slave for the second injury. After all, at the time this injury was inflicted, he was still a slave, and the master does not incur monetary liability for injuring his slave." The Rashba explains that once the court passes judgment, the slave is considered emancipated retroactively. And if a man smites the eye of his slave, or the eye of his maidservant and destroys it, he shall let him go free for his eye's sake. Exodus 21:26. The phrase "for his eye's sake" indicates, but not for the sake of both his eye and his tooth. Let's explain that. V'lo techas einash v'shino. If one intentionally strikes his Canaanite slave, and in doing so causes the loss of function of one of his 24 extremities, as enumerated and instructed in the Garment 6.7 and Condition 25a, the slave is immediately emancipated. If his former master injures him a second time, he must pay him damages for that second injury. Rambam Sefer Kinin Hilchot Avadim 514, arriving in the case of Mishnah there, and Sefer Nazikin Hilchot Hova Umazik 411, Shulchan Aruch Yodeh 267:39. The same can be inferred from the subsequent verse. And if he smites out his bondsman's tooth, or his bondwoman's tooth, he shall let him go free for his tooth's sake. Exodus 21:27. The phrase "for his tooth's sake" indicates, but not for the sake of both his eye and his tooth. The one returns to Rava's opinion upon that the contradiction of the testimony is the start of determining that testimony is conspiring testimony. Rav Idi Bar Avin said, "We too can learn from the Mishnah that Rava's claim is correct. It teaches in 72b, if one stole an ox or sheep, as established based on the testimony of two witnesses, and subsequently slaughtered the animal or sold it, also based on the testimony of the same witnesses, and these witnesses were found to be conspiring witnesses, these conspiring witnesses must pay everything, not only the principal amount, but also the fourfold or fivefold payment. What is not referring to a case where they testified concerning the theft, and then testified concerning the slaughter, and then subsequently rendered conspiring witnesses with regard to the theft, and then rendered conspiring witnesses with regard to the slaughter. Rav Idi Bar Avin states his inference. But once they were rendered conspiring witnesses with regard to the theft, the testimony with regard to the slaughter is in effect contradicted, i.e. with nullified, as testimony concerning the slaughter of an animal without prior testimony establishing that this animal was stolen is meaningless. And yet the Mishnah teaches that the witnesses must pay everything. And if it enters your mind that the contradiction of testimony is not the start of determining that testimony is conspiring testimony, why should he pay a fine for lying about the slaughter? The testimony concerning the slaughter was rendered irrelevant before it was established as conspiring testimony. Rather, must one not conclude from this mission that the contradiction testimony is the start of determining that testimony is conspiring testimony? To say the same refutation of this inference. With what are we dealing here? We are dealing with a case where the witnesses were rendered conspiring witnesses with regard to the slaughter first, before they were rendered conspiring witnesses in the testimony regarding the theft itself. In this case, the testimony concerning the slaughter was not rendered irrelevant before it was rendered conspiring testimony. And is this a matter in the dispute between other Amoraim? Before Rava and Abai discussed it, it was stated with regard to witnesses to a capital crime who were first contradicted by two other witnesses and ultimately were rendered conspiring witnesses. This is a matter of dispute between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar. One said these witnesses are killed, like all conspiring witnesses, is a capital case, as a contradiction of testimony is the start of determining that testimony is conspiring testimony, and one said they are not killed. The Gemara suggests it may be concluded that it is Rabbi Elazar who says they are not killed. The Elazar says witnesses who were contradicted in a case involving the taking of a life, a capital case, are flogged. Eidim shehuchashu benefesh lokin. The standard punishment for violating a prohibition is flogging. Nevertheless, this does not apply to violations that do not involve an action, since it is generally established that speaking does not constitute an action. Why is Rabbi Elazar by calling for flogging in the case of false witnesses? Rashi explains that the Torah in Deuteronomy 25:1 indicates that the punishment of flogging is imposed in cases of conspiring testimony where it is impossible to do to him as he conspired to do to his brother, Deuteronomy 19:19. The Gemara in Tractate Makkos 2b explains that this principle applies to all cases in which a witness is shown beyond doubt to have lied in his testimony he derived. Witnesses in a capital case who were contradicted but were not rendered conspiring witnesses are not flogged, even if they testified that someone had been murdered and the supposed victim subsequently appears in court. The reason is that providing false testimony is a transgression and can be subject to the punishment of court-imposed capital punishment, and such a transgression can never result in the punishment of lashes. Nevertheless, the court may punish him with lashes for rebelliousness to the extent they see fit. The Lachan, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan and Bava, who maintain that the contradiction of testimony is the start of determining that testimony is conspiring testimony. Consequently, if the false witnesses are subsequently rendered conspiring witnesses, they are sentenced to death, which is why there is a prohibition whose transgression can result in court-imposed capital punishment. When say for sure in Hilchos Sanhedrin 18:6, in the case of Mishnah, therefore violating the prohibition, you should not bear false witness against your neighbor. This is 2013. If it enters your mind that it is Rabbi Elazar who says that witnesses to a capital crime who were first contradicted and ultimately found to be conspiring witnesses are killed, why are they flogged in this case? There is always the possibility that they might be rendered conspiring witnesses, which would render them liable to receive court-imposed capital punishment. Although this is a case of a prohibition given as warning of liability for court-imposed capital punishment, and as a principle that one is not flogged for violating any prohibition given as warning of liability for court-imposed capital punishment. One is not flogged for transgressing any prohibition can lead to court-imposed capital punishment. Rabbim say for sure in Hilchos Sanhedrin 18:2. Although the violation of a prohibition is usually punished with lashes, if a transgression of this kind could lead to capital punishment, lashes are not administered. This is how the concept is applied by the Gemara here. Taz would point out that elsewhere the principle is presented in a different manner. With regard to any prohibition that involves capital punishment, even if this can occur only in certain limited cases, the punishment of lashes is never applied to this prohibition in any situation at all. They further explain the prohibition you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor in Exodus 20:13 is an exception, as the Gemara derives that there is sometimes a punishment of lashes for its violation. See Makkos 2b. Rather, isn't it correct to conclude from the statement that it is Rabbi Elazar who says that witnesses to a capital crime who were first contradicted and ultimately found to be conspiring witnesses are not killed? Then while affirms it may be concluded that this is so. The Gemara asks a question with regard to Rabbi Elazar's opinion that witnesses who are contradicted in the capital case are flogged. Why are they flogged? Simply because their testimony is contradicted. They are two witnesses and they are contradicted by two other witnesses. What did you see in the testimony of the second set of witnesses that leads you to rely on those witnesses to the extent that the first set of witnesses is flogged? You could just as well rely on these witnesses, like the first witnesses. How can the court ever determine with certainty that a given testimony is false based on a mere contradictory testimony? Abai said the contradiction to which Rabbi Elazar is referring involves a case where the witnesses said that the certain person murdered, and subsequently the individual who was allegedly killed came to the court on his feet, collectively disproving their testimony. If one stole an ox or sheep, and decided based on the testimony of two witnesses, and they subsequently slaughtered. If two witnesses testified that someone stole an animal, and a single witness testified that the thief slaughtered or sold the animal, or if the thief himself admits that he slaughtered or sold the animal, the thief is liable to pay the double payment, but he's exempt from paying fourfold or fivefold payment. Mom say for Nazikin, Hilchot Geneva 37 Torah Choshen Mishpat 350, or that sold the stolen animal. Now the story is based on the testimony of one witness or based on his own admission, i.e. he himself admitted that he performed these acts without there being any witness testimony. He pays a double payment, but does not pay the fourfold or fivefold payment. If one stole an animal and slaughtered it on Shabbat, Gana B'Tevach B'Shabbos. If one stole an animal and slaughtered it on Shabbat, or if he slaughtered it for idol worship, he is exempt from paying the fourfold or fivefold payment, even if he committed the Shabbat or idol worship offense unwittingly. The Rambam says in the Zichanel Geneva 33, Torah Shulchan 350, which is a capital offense. If he stole an animal and slaughtered it for the purpose of idol worship, or he stole his father's animal and subsequently his father died, Ganav Mishel Aviv U'Meis Aviv V'Chulu. If one stolen animal belonged to his father and subsequently his father died, and afterward the thief slaughtered the sold animal, he paid the double payment, but he is exempt from paying the fourfold or fivefold payment. I'm saying from the Zich and Hilchot Geneva 26 Torah Choshen Mishpat 350, and afterward he slaughtered or sold it, or if he stole the animal and subsequently consecrated it. If one stole an animal and after the owner despaired of retrieving it, the thief consecrated it and then slaughtered or sold it, he paid the double payment but did not pay the fourfold or fivefold payment. I'm saying from the Zich and Hilchot Geneva 26 as an offering, and afterward he slaughtered or sold it. In all these cases, the thief pays a double payment, but he does not pay the fourfold or fivefold payment. Rabbi Shimon says, in the case of sacrificial animals, for which the owner bears financial responsibility to replace with another animal, if one of the original animals that one stole is lost or dies, the thief is obligated to pay the fourfold or fivefold payment if he slaughtered one of the animals. If it is a sacrificial animal for which the owner bears no financial responsibility, the thief is exempt from the fourfold or fivefold payment. The Mishnah teaches that if the fact that the thief slaughtered or sold the animal was established based on the testimony of one witness, he is exempt from the fourfold or fivefold payment. The Gemara asks, isn't this obvious? The sages say in response, by stating this case, the Mishnah teaches this halacha. The case of the thief slaughtering the animal established based on the testimony of one witness is similar to a case where it is established based on his own admission. Just as in the case where the slaughter is established based on the testimony of one witness, if one other witness comes and corroborates the testimony of the first, he joins together with the first witness, and together their testimony is rendered a valid testimony of two. And if the thief becomes obligated to pay the fourfold or fivefold payment, so too where the slaughter is established based on an admission, if witnesses come after his admission, he becomes obligated to pay the fourfold or fivefold payment. The Gemara comments, the interpretation of the Mishnah serves to exclude that which Rav Huna says that Rav says. As Rav Huna says, the Rav says, one who admits he is liable to pay a fine is exempt from payment, even afterward witnesses come. With regard to one who admits that he has committed an act for which he is obligated to pay a fine, and afterward witnesses come and testify that he committed that act, if his admission was submitted in the presence of a court, the perpetrator is exempt from paying the fine. If the admission was made outside of a court, the perpetrator must pay the fine in accordance to the opinion of Vav, I'm going to say from the Zich and Hilchot Geneva 3:8, and testify to his liability. Since Rav Huna's halacha was mentioned, the Gemara discusses in detail the matter itself. Rav Huna says that Rav says, one who admits that he is liable to pay a fine is exempt from payment, even if afterward witnesses come and testify to his liability. Rav Chisda raised an objection to Rav Huna from a Baita. There was an incident involving Rabbi Gamliel. Rabbi Gamliel served as Nasi of the Sanhedrin and was one of the most important to name in the period following destruction of the temple. His father, Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, also served as Nasi of the Sanhedrin and was one of the leaders of the nation during the Great Revolt. At the time of the destruction of the temple, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai brought Rabbi Gamliel to Yavne to study Torah in safety away from Jerusalem. After the death of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, he succeeded him as Nasi of the Sanhedrin. During the period when Rabbi Gamliel was the Nasi, the city of Yavne became a spiritual center in which different enactments and halachot were established for future generations. Consequently, Rabbi Gamliel was also known as Ramban Gamliel was also known as Rabbi Gamliel of Yavne. The great sages of his time were his disciples. His brother-in-law, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, This was a remarkable group of sages that had no equal for many subsequent generations. Rabban Gamliel wanted to create a spiritual center in Eretz Yisrael that would unite the entire Jewish people, as the temple had done in its time. As part of this endeavor, he tried to raise the stature of the office of the Nasi and establish the Sanhedrin as a locus of power. His stern and uncompromising leadership eventually led his friends to dismiss him from office for a period of time, and to appoint Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah in his place. Barachot 27b. Ultimately, all understood that his intentions were only for the good of the nation, and he was quickly restored to his previous position. There are not many halachot in which Rabban Gamliel's name is mentioned, but in his time and under his tutelage, some of the most important decisions affecting the spiritual history of the Jewish people took shape, e.g., the final decision to act according to the opinion of Beit Hillel, the rejection of Rabbi Eliezer's opinion in particular matters, and the establishment of a fixed formula for the immediate prayer. In those halachot that were transmitted in his name, one can see his general approach to halacha, which was to draw consistent conclusions based on the principles he espoused, without compromising those principles. It is known that the sons of Rabban Gamliel became sages. Shimon ben Gamliel II, who served as the Nasi of the Sanhedrin as his father, and Rabbi Hanina ben Gamliel, who was blind in the eye of his Canaanite slave Tavi. Rabban Gamliel's slave Tavi is the most well-known Canaanite slave mentioned in the Talmud. Rabban Gamliel was very fond of Tavi and appreciated his fine character and extensive Torah knowledge. For this reason, when Rabban Gamliel thought that he had finally found a way to emancipate him, he was filled with joy. Some later authorities pondered about why Rabban Gamliel was so happy when Tavi was blinded, as he prohibited to cause bodily injury even to a slave. In 92b, they explained that Tavi agreed to be maimed in order to gain his freedom, and as a result there was no prohibition involved, and that's in the Beis Yodeya 2:101. Although later authorities insisted Rabban Gamliel did not do this intentionally, as he did not want to violate Torah's prohibition against emancipating a Canaanite slave, Sefer HaMiknah, Religion 24b. Although Tavi remained in service of Rabban Gamliel due to the prohibition against emancipating Canaanite slaves, Rabban Gamliel treated him like a member of his family and even mourned him when he died. He just said about Tavi, there were many who were worthy to be ordained, like Tavi, the slave of Rabban Gamliel. Due to their lineage, they did not achieve that status, and he experienced great joy. It is evident from the story that Rabban Gamliel injured Tavi accidentally. Some commentaries note that this understanding presents a difficulty, as a master's obligation to emancipate his slave in the event of injury applies only to deliberate injuries, as stated in Tractate Kedushin 24b. However, a dissenting opinion is presented there from the Yavits. As a result, Rabban Gamliel had wanted to emancipate Tavi, but it is generally prohibited to emancipate a Canaanite slave. The injury provided a fortuitous opportunity for Rabban Gamliel to emancipate his slave, as blinding the eye of one slave results in his emancipation. See Exodus 21:27. Rabban Gamliel encountered Rabbi Yeshua. This is Rabbi Yeshua ben Hananiah the Levite, one of the leading sages in the generation following the destruction of the Second Temple. He served as one of the Levite singers in the temple. After his destruction, he was among the students who followed their primary teacher, Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai, in Yavna. Yeshua lived a life of poverty, working as a blacksmith, and was recognized by all as one of the leading Torah authorities. While he disagreed with Rabban Gamliel's rulings on several occasions, he ultimately accepted the authority of the Nasi. After Rabban Gamliel's death, he served as leader of the sages. Said to him, "Do you know that my slave Tavi was emancipated?" Rabbi Yeshua said to him, "Why? What circumstance enabled you to emancipate him?" Rabbi Yeshua said to Rabban Gamliel, "Your statement is nothing, and is not ground for his emancipation, as he has no witnesses." Shecha ein lo edim. There is a dispute between the early commentaries with regard to one who has committed an act for which he is obligated to pay a fine. In a case where there are no witnesses, but the perpetrator himself is aware of his offence, some say that although the court cannot impose a fine in the absence of testimony, nevertheless the offender has a moral obligation to pay it. Other commentaries disagree with this opinion. It has been claimed that the case of Rabbi Gamliel apparently proves that there is no obligation, legal or moral, to pay a fine if there are no witnesses, says the Rashba. The reason is that if there was a moral obligation for Rabbi Gamliel to emancipate his slave, His happiness would have been warranted just as if he was obligated by the court to do so. You can testify that you did this to him. The principle is that one does not pay a fine based on admission. One pays a fine but only based on the testimony of witnesses. The requirement to emancipate one's slave after injuring his eye is a type of fine. The Gemara first on the Baita, but if Tavi had witnesses who could testify with regard to injury, Rabbi Gamliel would be obligated to emancipate him, even if they testify after Rabbi Gamliel's admission. And we can learn from this that one who admits that he is liable to pay a fine is liable, even if afterward witnesses come and testify with regard to his liability. Rav Huna said to Rav Chisda, this case involving Rabbi Gamliel is different, as he admitted to his actions when he was not in the presence of a court. The requirement to emancipate one's slave after injuring him, although a type of fine, is applicable even in the absence of ordained judges, despite the fact that in general fines cannot be collected in Jewish courts under those circumstances. Therefore, if witnesses testify that they witnessed an injury of this kind, the master may no longer retain ownership of the slave. The reason is that if the claimant seizes the payment of a fine, he is allowed to keep it, and a slave is by definition in possession of his own body. Some authorities rule that the slave's owner should be excommunicated until he agrees to write a bill of manumission for the injured slave. Says the Ravid. The Ramah adds that these halachot apply if the master admits that he has inflicted an injury on his slave. The latter commentaries disagree as to the circumstances of the Ramah's ruling. Some say that he's referring to a case where witnesses testify with regard to the injury after the master's admission, and the reason he is required to emancipate the slave is that an admission in court in the absence of ordained judges is not considered valid admission. Others maintain that this ruling applies even if witnesses do not testify, according to the principle that the admission of a litigant is similar to the testimony of witnesses. Rambam Sefer Kenyan, Yochat Avodim 517, Shulchan Aruch, Yoredei 26740, and Shech and Bahagua there. An admission made outside a courtroom does not have the legal status of an admission, as outside the court one may make a statement that he does not intend to make in court, or he may try to fend off a claim by bluffing or obfuscating outside the court, see Sanhedrin 29a. Moreover, one generally does not reveal his claims until he reaches the court itself, Bava Kamma Daf 31a. An admission not in the presence of a court does not exempt the perpetrator from paying the relevant fine. And while challenges, but Rabbi Yeshua was the president of the court, so it is unlikely that the encounter took place in court. That's the end of the Omid. Thank you for listening. Bye.